Hello there, and welcome back to Sleep Wire, where we explore the hidden workings of the everyday world around us, one gentle explanation at a time. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with me tonight. Maybe you've had one of those days where your mind just won't stop racing, or perhaps you're simply curious about the invisible forces that connect us all. Either way, you're in the perfect place. Tonight, we're going to explore something truly remarkable that's happening all around you right now, even as you lie there in the darkness. It's something so common that we rarely think about it, yet so extraordinary that when you really understand what's happening, it seems almost magical. We're going to discover how Wi-Fi signals, those invisible messengers carrying everything from your favorite bedtime podcast to late-night messages from friends, actually travel through the solid walls of your home. As you settle in, maybe adjusting your pillow just right, pulling the covers up to that perfect, comfortable position, I want you to imagine for a moment that you could see the Wi-Fi signals flowing through your room. They'd look like gentle waves rippling through the air, passing through walls as if they were made of the thinnest gossamer, carrying tiny packets of information on their invisible journey. These waves are moving through you right now, billions of them every second, so gentle and subtle that your body doesn't even notice they're there. The story we're about to explore together is one of physics and engineering, of electromagnetic fields and molecular structures, but I promise to tell it in a way that's as soothing as it is fascinating. We'll discover why your Wi-Fi works in some rooms better than others, why certain walls seem almost transparent to these signals, while others block them like fortress walls, and how engineers have learned to harness the fundamental forces of nature to keep us all connected. So take a deep breath, let your body sink a little deeper into your mattress, and let's begin this journey into the invisible world of electromagnetic waves. Don't worry if you drift off before we finish. That's perfectly fine. The waves will keep flowing, the signals will keep traveling, and the quiet miracle of wireless communication will continue its endless dance through the walls around you, whether you're awake to witness it or peacefully dreaming. Tonight's journey begins with understanding what Wi-Fi actually is at its most fundamental level. The term itself. Wi-Fi doesn't actually stand for anything specific, though many people think it means wireless fidelity. It's simply a trademarked name that was chosen because it sounded friendly and approachable, much like hi-fi for high-fidelity audio systems. But what Wi-Fi represents is something far more profound. The ability to send information through the air, through walls, through almost anything, using nothing more than carefully orchestrated electromagnetic waves. These waves are cousins to the light coming from your bedside lamp, siblings to the radio waves that have been broadcasting music for over a century, and distant relatives to the X-rays that doctors use to see inside our bodies. They're all part of the same fundamental phenomenon, electromagnetic radiation, just operating at different frequencies, different speeds of oscillation, like notes on an impossibly vast piano where each key produces not sound, but a different way for energy to ripple through space. To truly understand how Wi-Fi signals pass through walls, we need to first understand what these signals actually are. Imagine, if you will, dropping a pebble into a still pond. The ripples that spread outward from that point, That's similar to how electromagnetic waves propagate from your Wi-Fi router. But unlike water waves, which need water to travel through, electromagnetic waves can travel through the vacuum of space, through air, through walls, through almost anything, because they're not actually waves in a medium. They're oscillating electric and magnetic fields that create each other as they move. Your Wi-Fi router, sitting there quietly in your living room or tucked away in a closet, is actually a remarkably sophisticated radio transmitter. It operates primarily on 2 frequency bands, though newer routers have added a third. The first is the 2.4 GHz band, where the electromagnetic waves oscillate back and forth 2.4 billion times every single second. Try to imagine that, for a moment, 2,400,000,000 complete cycles, from peak to trough and back to peak again, in the time it takes you to blink. At this frequency, the wavelength, the physical distance between one peak and the next, is about 12.5 centimeters, roughly the width of your hand with fingers spread. The second band that most routers use is the 5 GHz band, where the waves oscillate 5 billion times per second. Here, the wavelength shrinks to about 6 centimeters, about the length of your thumb. And the newest routers, those supporting the latest Wi-Fi 6E standard, can also use the 6 GHz band, with wavelengths just slightly shorter still. These different frequencies each have their own characteristics, their own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to penetrating walls, and we'll explore all of that as our journey continues. But what exactly is oscillating in these electromagnetic waves? It's not air molecules, like with sound waves. It's not water, like ocean waves. Instead, it's the very fabric of the electromagnetic field that permeates all of space. At each point in space, there's an electric field strength and a magnetic field strength, and Wi-Fi signals are organized disturbances in these fields, rippling outward from your router at the speed of light. 299,792,458 meters per second, to be precise, though it's actually slightly slower when traveling through air or walls, for reasons we'll discover. When your router wants to send information, say, the next few seconds of the podcast you're listening to right now, it doesn't just emit a steady wave like a lighthouse beam. Instead, it modulates the wave, changing its characteristics in precisely controlled ways to encode data. The primary method it uses is called QM, or quadrature amplitude modulation, combined with something called OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. These are complex terms, but the idea is beautifully simple. The router changes both the strength and the timing of the waves to create patterns that represent digital ones and zeros. Imagine you're standing at the edge of that pond again, but this time, instead of dropping just one pebble, you have a whole handful of different-sized stones, and you drop them in precise patterns. Some create bigger ripples, some smaller. Some you drop slightly before others, creating phase differences in the waves. The resulting pattern of ripples on the pond's surface would be incredibly complex. But if someone on the other side of the pond knew exactly what patterns to look for, they could decode your message from the way the waves interact. That's essentially what your router and your device are doing, except with electromagnetic waves, and at speeds that boggle the mind. The actual data being transmitted is broken up into tiny chunks called packets. Each packet is like a little envelope of information, complete with an address where it's going, a return address where it came from, and the actual data payload inside. These packets are incredibly small, typically no more than 1,500 bytes of data, which might be just a fraction of a second of audio or a tiny piece of a picture. Your device receives thousands of these packets every second, reassembles them in the right order, and presents you with a seamless stream of information. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Your router isn't just sending out one stream of data. Modern routers use something called MIMO multiple input, multiple output technology, which means they have multiple antennas, each capable of sending and receiving independent streams of data simultaneously. It's like having multiple conversations happening at once, all on the same frequency, but kept separate through clever signal processing. A router with 3 antennas might be sending 3 different streams of data to your laptop, while simultaneously sending different streams to your phone, your smart TV, and your tablet, all at the same time, all on the same channel. The newest Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E routers take this even further with something called MIMO multi-user MIMO, which can communicate with multiple devices truly simultaneously, not just taking turns very quickly. They also use a technique called OFDMA, orthogonal frequency division multiple access, which divides the channel into smaller sub-channels, allowing the router to allocate just the right amount of bandwidth to each device based on its needs. It's like having a highway where the lanes can dynamically resize themselves based on traffic. A text message might only need a narrow lane, while a 4K video stream gets a much wider one. Now, let's delve deeper into the nature of electromagnetic waves themselves, because understanding these remarkable phenomena is key to understanding how they interact with walls. Electromagnetic waves are one of the fundamental forces of nature, right up there with gravity and the nuclear forces that hold atoms together. They're responsible for everything from the light that lets us see, to the heat that warms us, to the radio waves that have been carrying human voices across vast distances for over a century. At their most basic level, electromagnetic waves are self-propagating disturbances in the electromagnetic field. This might sound abstract, so let's think about it differently. Imagine you have an electric charge, perhaps an electron in an antenna. When you move that charge up and down, it creates a changing electric field around it. But here's the remarkable part. A changing electric field automatically creates a magnetic field at right angles to itself. And a changing magnetic field automatically creates an electric field at right angles to itself. So once you start the process by wiggling that charge, the electric and magnetic fields keep creating each other, propagating outward through space like a three-dimensional ripple. This is why electromagnetic waves don't need a medium to travel through. They are their own medium, in a sense. The electric field creates the magnetic field, which creates the electric field, which creates the magnetic field, and so on, in an endless dance that carries the wave forward at the speed of light. It's one of the most elegant phenomena in all of physics, described perfectly by James Clerk Maxwell's equations, formulated over 150 years ago. The frequency of an electromagnetic wave, how many times it oscillates per second, determines many of its properties. Low-frequency waves, like AM radio broadcasting around 1 MHz, have wavelengths of hundreds of meters and can travel enormous distances, bouncing off the ionosphere to reach the other side of the planet. High-frequency waves, like visible light at hundreds of terahertz, have wavelengths measured in nanometers and behave much more like the light we're familiar with. Traveling in straight lines, casting shadows, unable to penetrate opaque objects. Wi-Fi frequencies at 2.4,5 and 6 GHz sit in a sweet spot in the electromagnetic spectrum known as microwaves. They're high enough frequency to carry lots of data. The higher the frequency, the more information you can pack into the signal, but low enough that they can still penetrate walls and other obstacles reasonably well. It's a careful balance, and the choice of these particular frequencies wasn't arbitrary. The 2.4 GHz band, for instance, is what's known as an ISMM band, industrial, scientific, and medical. It was set aside internationally for uses other than communication, which is why your microwave oven also operates at 2.4 GHz. Water molecules happen to absorb energy efficiently at this frequency, which is great for heating food, but can cause interference with Wi-Fi. The 5 GHz band was later allocated specifically for wireless networking, offering more channels and less interference, though with somewhat reduced range. The 6 GHz band, newly available for Wi-Fi 6E, offers even more spectrum, though different countries have different rules about its use. When these electromagnetic waves encounter matter, like the walls of your home, several things can happen. Some of the wave's energy can be reflected, bouncing back like light off a mirror. Some can be absorbed, converted into tiny amounts of heat in the material. Some can be refracted, changing direction as it passes through. And some can be transmitted straight through, continuing on its journey with reduced strength. The proportions of each depend on the frequency of the wave and the properties of the material, which brings us to the heart of our story. The journey of a Wi-Fi signal through a wall is a fascinating interplay between electromagnetic waves and the atomic structure of matter. To understand this, we need to think about walls not as solid barriers, but as what they really are at the atomic level. Mostly empty space with tiny particles held in a loose framework. Consider a typical interior wall in your home. It might be made of drywall, also called gypsum board or plasterboard. This material consists of a core of gypsum, calcium sulfate dihydrate, sandwiched between two sheets of paper. At the molecular level, gypsum is a crystal lattice of calcium, sulfur, and oxygen atoms with water molecules incorporated into the structure. Between these atoms and molecules, there's vast amounts of empty space. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble at the center, and the electrons would be like gnats buzzing around the outer seats. When a Wi-Fi signal encounters this wall, it's experiencing the electromagnetic fields of all these atoms. The oscillating electric field of the Wi-Fi wave causes the electrons in the wall's atoms to oscillate slightly in response. These oscillating electrons then re-radiate electromagnetic waves of their own. The sum of all these re-radiated waves, combined with the original wave, determines what happens next. In materials that are good conductors of electricity, like metals, the electrons are free to move easily. When a Wi-Fi signal hits a metal surface, these free electrons respond strongly to the oscillating electric field, moving back and forth in large amplitudes. This creates re-radiated waves that are nearly perfectly out of phase with the incoming wave, resulting in almost complete reflection. This is why metal is so effective at blocking Wi-Fi signals. It's like a mirror for radio waves. But in materials like drywall, wood, or glass, the electrons are bound to their atoms. They can still oscillate in response to the Wi-Fi signal, but only slightly. This creates weaker re-radiated waves that partially cancel out the original wave, resulting in some attenuation, weakening of the signal, but not complete blockage. The signal that emerges on the other side of the wall is weaker than what went in, but it's still there, still carrying its information. The amount of attenuation depends on several factors. First, there's the thickness of the wall. The thicker it is, the more material the signal has to pass through, and the more it's weakened. A typical interior wall might be about half an inch of drywall on each side of a 3.5-inch air gap, with wooden studs every 16 inches, for a total thickness of about 4.5 inches. Each layer of drywall might attenuate the signal by about 3 decibels, dB, meaning it cuts the power roughly in half. Then there's the frequency dependence. Higher frequency signals generally have more trouble penetrating walls than lower frequency ones. This is because the wavelength of the signal affects how it interacts with the atoms in the material. The 2.4 GHz signals, with their longer wavelengths, tend to penetrate walls better than 5 GHz signals. It's not a huge difference, perhaps 2-3 dB more attenuation for 5 GHz. But it's enough to notice in practice. The material's water content plays a significant role too. Water molecules are polar. They have a positive end and a negative end, which makes them respond strongly to oscillating electric fields. This is why 2.4 GHz was chosen for microwave ovens. Water absorbs energy efficiently at this frequency. So walls that are damp, or materials that naturally contain water, like concrete, which can retain moisture for years after it's poured, will attenuate Wi-Fi signals more than dry materials. But the journey through the wall isn't just about attenuation. The signal also experiences a change in speed. Electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light in a vacuum, but they slow down when passing through materials. This slowing is described by the material's refractive index, the same property that causes light to bend when passing from air into water or glass. For most building materials, the refractive index for radio frequencies is between 1.5 and 9, meaning the waves travel at between 1/9 and 2/3 the speed of light while inside the wall. This change in speed causes refraction. The wave changes direction slightly as it enters and exits the wall. It's usually a small effect for Wi-Fi passing through walls at normal angles, but it can become significant for signals hitting walls at steep angles. This refraction, combined with the wavelength of Wi-Fi signals, can also create interesting interference patterns. When a Wi-Fi signal passes through a wall, it doesn't just take one path. Signals reflect off both surfaces of the wall, bounce around inside the wall cavity, reflect off studs and pipes and electrical wiring, and eventually multiple versions of the signal emerge from the other side, all slightly out of phase with each other. These multiple signals can interfere constructively, adding together to make a stronger signal, or destructively, cancelling each other out, creating a complex pattern of strong and weak spots in the Wi-Fi coverage. This multipath propagation, as it's called, used to be a major problem for Wi-Fi. Early Wi-Fi standards struggled with it, as the multiple delayed copies of the signal would interfere with each other, corrupting the data. But modern Wi-Fi has turned this bug into a feature. Technologies like MIMO actually rely on multipath propagation, using sophisticated signal processing to separate out the different paths and use them to carry independent streams of data. It's like turning an echo-filled cave into a concert hall. What was once a problem is now an advantage. Let's go even deeper now, into the realm of material science, to understand exactly how different materials interact with Wi-Fi signals at the molecular and atomic level. Every material has what's called a complex permittivity, a measure of how it responds to electric fields. This property has two components: the real part, which describes how much the material polarizes in response to an electric field, and the imaginary part, which describes how much energy the material absorbs from the field. When a Wi-Fi signal's oscillating electric field encounters the atoms and molecules in a wall, it causes the charged particles, mainly electrons, to move. In insulators like drywall or wood, the electrons are bound to their atoms, but they can still shift slightly, creating tiny electric dipoles. These dipoles try to align with the electric field, but because the field is oscillating billions of times per second, they're constantly playing catch-up, always slightly out of phase with the driving field. This phase lag is crucial. It means that the polarization of the material is not perfectly in sync with the electric field, and this misalignment causes energy to be transferred from the wave to the material. The energy goes into moving the electrons back and forth, and ultimately gets converted into heat, though the amount is so tiny that you'd never notice it. A typical Wi-Fi router puts out about 100 milliwatts of power, and even if a wall absorbed all of it, which it doesn't, that's less than 1,000th of the energy from a single birthday candle. Different materials have vastly different permittivities. Air has a relative permittivity very close to 1, meaning it barely interacts with electromagnetic waves at all. Water, on the other hand, has a relative permittivity of about 80 at low frequencies, though it drops to about 78 at Wi-Fi frequencies. This high permittivity is due to water's polar molecules, which can rotate to align with electric fields. But this rotation takes time, and at gigahertz frequencies, the molecules can't keep up perfectly, leading to significant absorption. Concrete is particularly interesting from a Wi-Fi perspective. Fresh concrete contains a lot of water. It needs water to undergo the chemical reactions that make it harden. Even after the concrete has set, it retains moisture for years, slowly drying out from the inside. This means that newer concrete buildings tend to have worse Wi-Fi penetration than older ones. Additionally, concrete often contains steel reinforcement bars, or rebar, arranged in a grid pattern. These metal bars can act like a Faraday cage, reflecting and absorbing Wi-Fi signals. Depending on the thickness and reinforcement, concrete walls can attenuate signals by anywhere from 10 to 12 decibels for regular 4-inch concrete, though heavily reinforced concrete with densely spaced rebar can block signals much more severely, sometimes exceeding 20 to 45 decibels or more, depending on the moisture content and metal density. The spacing of the rebar matters too. If the bars are spaced at about half a wavelength of the Wi-Fi signal, about 6 centimeters for 2.4 gigahertz, they can create a resonance effect, strongly blocking the signal. This is similar to how the metal mesh in your microwave oven's door blocks microwaves while still letting you see inside. The holes in the mesh are much smaller than the wavelength of the microwaves, so the waves can't pass through. Wood presents its own unique challenges and opportunities. The permittivity of wood varies significantly with its moisture content and grain direction. Dry wood has a relatively low permittivity and causes minimal attenuation of Wi-Fi signals. Perhaps 4 dB for a typical wooden door. But wet wood can attenuate signals much more strongly. The grain structure also matters. Signals traveling perpendicular to the grain experience different attenuation than those traveling parallel to it, though the difference is usually small for Wi-Fi frequencies. Glass is almost transparent to Wi-Fi signals. Its permittivity at gigahertz frequencies is relatively low, and it has very low loss, meaning signals pass through with minimal attenuation, typically less than 1 dB for a standard window pane. However, modern energy-efficient windows often have thin metal coatings to reflect infrared radiation, and these coatings can also reflect Wi-Fi signals. Low-E, low-emissivity glass, designed to keep heat in during winter and out during summer, can attenuate Wi-Fi signals by 10 dB or more. That's a factor of 10 reduction in signal strength. Brick and stone walls present a middle ground. They're denser than drywall and contain some moisture, so they attenuate signals more, typically 8 dB, depending on thickness and composition. The mortar between bricks can have different properties than the bricks themselves, creating a complex pattern of transmission and reflection. One fascinating aspect of signal propagation through walls is the phenomenon of polarization. Wi-Fi signals are typically linearly polarized, meaning the electric field oscillates in a single plane. Most Wi-Fi antennas are vertically polarized when the device is in its normal orientation. When these signals encounter walls with asymmetric properties, like wood with its grain structure, the polarization can be rotated. This can lead to polarization mismatch between the transmitting and receiving antennas, causing additional signal loss. Now let's take a detailed journey through various types of walls your Wi-Fi signal might encounter in its travels through your home. Each type of wall presents its own unique challenges and behaviors, creating the complex landscape of wireless coverage that you experience every day. Starting with the most common type in modern homes, drywall, also known as plasterboard, wallboard, or gypsum board, is remarkably friendly to Wi-Fi signals. A typical sheet of half-inch drywall attenuates 2.4 GHz signals by only about 3 decibels. To put that in perspective, that means about half the signal power makes it through. The gypsum core, despite containing water molecules in its crystal structure, about 21% by weight, doesn't absorb radio waves as strongly as liquid water because the water molecules are bound into the crystal lattice and can't rotate freely in response to the oscillating electric field. When your Wi-Fi signal approaches a drywall surface, here's what happens at the microscopic level. The electromagnetic wave first encounters the paper facing of the drywall. Paper is made of cellulose fibers, long chains of sugar molecules, which have a relatively low permittivity. The signal passes through with minimal interaction, perhaps losing a fraction of a decibel. Then it hits the gypsum core. The calcium sulfate molecules, arranged in their orderly crystal structure, respond weakly to the oscillating electric field. Some electrons shift slightly, some molecular bonds stretch and compress ever so slightly, but most of the wave's energy continues forward. Interior walls in homes typically consist of drywall on both sides of a hollow cavity, usually 3.5 inches wide for 2x4 studs or 5.5 inches for 2x6 studs. This cavity is mostly air, which is nearly transparent to Wi-Fi. However, the cavity often contains other materials that can affect signal propagation. Wooden studs, spaced typically every 16 inches on center, cause additional attenuation, though wood is generally Wi-Fi friendly, causing only 4 dB of loss per stud the signal passes through. The real complications come from what else might be in that wall cavity. Electrical wiring, while necessary for powering your devices, can interfere with Wi-Fi signals. The metal conductors can cause reflections and create shadow zones. Copper pipes for plumbing are even more problematic. A vertical copper pipe can act like an antenna at certain frequencies, absorbing and re-radiating signals in complex patterns. And if the wall contains insulation, the type matters greatly. Fiberglass insulation, the fluffy pink or yellow material common in many homes, has very little effect on Wi-Fi signals. It's mostly air with thin glass fibers that are much smaller than the wavelength of Wi-Fi, so the signals pass through almost unimpeded. But foil-backed insulation, designed to reflect thermal radiation, will also reflect Wi-Fi signals strongly. This can create dead zones on one side of the wall, while actually improving signal strength on the other side by reflecting signals back into the room. Older homes might have plaster walls instead of drywall. Plaster is typically applied in multiple coats over wooden or metal lath. The plaster itself, being similar in composition to the gypsum in drywall but often thicker, attenuates signals somewhat more, perhaps 7 dB for a typical plaster wall. But if the lath is metal, usually a mesh or expanded metal sheet, it can severely attenuate Wi-Fi signals, acting like a partial Faraday cage. Metal lath can add 15 dB of attenuation or more, depending on the mesh size and thickness. Concrete walls present one of the biggest challenges for Wi-Fi propagation in residential settings. A 4-inch concrete wall might attenuate signals by 12 dB at 2.4 GHz, and even more at higher frequencies. But the story is more complex than simple absorption. Concrete's properties change over time as it cures and dries. Fresh concrete, still curing, contains a lot of free water and can attenuate signals by 15, 20 dB or more. Over months and years, as the concrete slowly dries from the inside out, its Wi-Fi transparency improves somewhat. The aggregate used in concrete, the sand, gravel, or crushed stone that makes up most of its volume, also affects signal propagation. Different types of rock have different permittivities. Limestone aggregate, for instance, tends to be more transparent to Wi-Fi than granite aggregate. And if the concrete contains steel reinforcement, which it usually does in load-bearing applications, the situation becomes even more complex. Reinforced concrete with a grid of rebar can act as a frequency-selective surface. If the spacing of the rebar happens to be close to half a wavelength of the Wi-Fi signal, about 6 centimeters for 2.4 GHz or 3 centimeters for 5 GHz, it can create resonance effects that strongly block those particular frequencies. This is why Wi-Fi coverage in concrete buildings can be so unpredictable, with dead zones appearing in unexpected places. Brick walls, common in older buildings and some modern construction, typically attenuate Wi-Fi signals by 8 dB, depending on thickness and composition. The bricks themselves are made from fired clay, which has undergone chemical changes during the firing process that affect its electromagnetic properties. The mortar between bricks, typically a mixture of cement, lime, sand, and water, has different properties than the bricks, creating a heterogeneous structure that signals must navigate. When a Wi-Fi signal encounters a brick wall, it experiences multiple reflections and refractions at the boundaries between brick and mortar. Some signal paths go straight through bricks, some through mortar, some bounce back and forth between bricks before emerging. This creates a complex multipath environment that modern MIMO systems can actually exploit to improve performance. Exterior walls often present additional challenges. They're typically thicker than interior walls and may contain vapor barriers, plastic or foil sheets designed to prevent moisture from entering the wall cavity. Foil vapor barriers are particularly problematic for Wi-Fi, reflecting signals almost as effectively as a metal sheet. House wrap, like Tyvek, being made of plastic fibers, has minimal effect on Wi-Fi signals, but some modern house wraps include metallic layers for improved thermal performance, and these can significantly attenuate wireless signals. Windows, which you might expect to be transparent to Wi-Fi like they are to light, can actually be quite complex. Plain glass is indeed nearly transparent to Wi-Fi, causing less than 1 dB of attenuation, but modern windows are rarely just plain glass. Double-pane windows have 2 layers of glass with an air or gas gap between them. The glass itself doesn't attenuate much, but the multiple surfaces can cause reflections that create interference patterns. Energy-efficient windows with low E coatings are particularly problematic for Wi-Fi. These coatings are thin, transparent layers of metal oxide, often silver or tin oxide, applied to the glass to reflect infrared radiation. While invisible to the eye, they're quite visible to Wi-Fi signals, reflecting them almost as effectively as a metal surface. A low E window can attenuate Wi-Fi signals by 10, 30 dB, depending on the type and number of coatings. As Wi-Fi signals travel through your home, bouncing off walls, passing through obstacles, and interfering with themselves, they create complex three-dimensional patterns of electromagnetic energy. Understanding these patterns helps explain why your Wi-Fi might work perfectly in one corner of a room, but poorly just a few feet away. When your router transmits a signal, it doesn't just take a single straight-line path to your device. Instead, the signal spreads out in all directions, modified by the antenna's radiation pattern, reflects off surfaces, diffracts around edges, and scatters off small objects. All these different paths eventually reach your device, but they've traveled different distances and experienced different delays, attenuations, and phase shifts. This multipath propagation creates what's known as a spatially varying channel. At some locations, the multiple signal paths arrive in phase with each other, adding constructively to create a strong signal. At other locations, they arrive out of phase, cancelling each other out and creating weak spots or dead zones. These patterns can be incredibly complex, with variations on the scale of half a wavelength, just a few centimeters for Wi-Fi frequencies. The path loss, how much the signal weakens with distance, follows predictable patterns in free space. In an ideal environment with no obstacles, signal power decreases with the square of distance. Double the distance, and you get 1/4 the power. This is simply due to the spreading of electromagnetic energy over an ever larger sphere as it propagates outward. In decibels, this translates to a 6 dB loss for every doubling of distance. But in indoor environments, the path loss exponent is typically higher due to obstacles and absorption. Instead of losing 6 dB per distance doubling, you might lose 8, 10 dB or more. The exact value depends on the environment. Open offices might have a path loss exponent of 2.5 to 3, while dense indoor environments with many walls might have exponents of 4 or higher. Reflection is one of the key phenomena affecting indoor propagation. When a Wi-Fi signal hits a surface, some energy is reflected back. The amount of reflection depends on the impedance mismatch between the two materials. The greater the difference in electromagnetic properties, the more reflection occurs. Metal surfaces are nearly perfect reflectors for Wi-Fi, bouncing back almost all the signal energy. Concrete and brick are partial reflectors, bouncing back perhaps 10 to 30% of the signal energy. Drywall and wood are weak reflectors, bouncing back only a few percent. These reflections can be helpful or harmful. A metal filing cabinet might create a shadow zone behind it where Wi-Fi doesn't work well, but it might also reflect signals around a corner to reach areas that wouldn't otherwise have coverage. Modern Wi-Fi systems with beamforming capabilities can actually adapt to these reflections, focusing signal energy in directions that provide the best path to each client device. Diffraction allows Wi-Fi signals to bend around obstacles and edges. When a wave encounters an edge, like the corner of a wall or the edge of a doorway, it spreads out into the shadow region behind the obstacle. This is why you can sometimes get Wi-Fi signal even when there's no direct line of sight to the router. The amount of diffraction depends on the wavelength relative to the size of the obstacle. Longer wavelengths, lower frequencies, diffract more readily, which is another reason why 2.4 GHz signals often provide better coverage than 5 GHz in cluttered environments. Scattering occurs when signals encounter objects that are comparable in size to the wavelength or smaller. In indoor environments, this includes things like lamp fixtures, picture frames, furniture hardware, and even people. Each scattering object becomes a secondary source of electromagnetic waves, re-radiating the signal in many directions. While individual scattering events might be weak, the cumulative effect of many scatterers can significantly affect signal propagation. The human body itself is an interesting obstacle for Wi-Fi signals. We're mostly water, about 60% by weight, and water strongly absorbs 2.4 GHz signals. A person standing between a router and a device can attenuate the signal by 3, 10 dB, depending on their size and orientation. This is why you might notice your Wi-Fi performance change when people move around the room. It's also why laptop Wi-Fi often works better when the screen is open, as the antenna is typically in the display bezel and gets raised above the water-filled obstacle of your torso. Furniture also plays a role in shaping Wi-Fi propagation. A wooden desk might cause 2-3 dB of attenuation. A metal filing cabinet could cause 20 dB or more. Upholstered furniture with metal springs can create complex reflection and absorption patterns. Even a fish tank, with its large volume of water, can significantly attenuate Wi-Fi signals passing through it. Potentially 10, 15 dB or more depending on its size. The polarization of Wi-Fi signals adds another layer of complexity. Most Wi-Fi antennas are linearly polarized, typically vertically when the device is in its normal orientation. But as signals reflect off surfaces and pass through materials, their polarization can change. A signal that starts out vertically polarized might become horizontally or elliptically polarized after multiple reflections. If the receiving antenna is still vertically oriented, it won't capture horizontally polarized signals efficiently, leading to additional loss. The evolution of Wi-Fi technology has been remarkable, with each new generation bringing innovations that not only increase speed, but also improve how signals deal with the challenges of wall penetration and indoor propagation. Let's explore how modern Wi-Fi technologies work with and around the physics of wall penetration. MIMO technology, multiple input, multiple output, has revolutionized how Wi-Fi deals with multipath propagation. Instead of seeing multiple signal paths as a problem to be overcome, MIMO embraces them. A router with 4 antennas can potentially send 4 different data streams simultaneously, each taking different paths through the environment. The receiver, also with multiple antennas, uses sophisticated signal processing to separate out these streams. It's like having 4 conversations happening simultaneously in the same room, but being able to focus on each one individually. What makes MIMO particularly clever is that it actually works better in environments with lots of multipath, exactly the kind of cluttered indoor environments where Wi-Fi is typically used. The walls, furniture, and other obstacles that create multipath reflections actually help MIMO systems by creating the diverse signal paths needed to separate the different data streams. In a perfectly open environment with no reflections, MIMO wouldn't work as well. Beamforming takes this a step further. Instead of broadcasting signals equally in all directions, beamforming systems can focus signal energy toward specific devices. The router uses feedback from the client device to understand the channel characteristics, essentially learning which phases and amplitudes on each antenna will cause the signals to add constructively at the client's location. This can improve signal strength by 10 dB, which can make the difference between a reliable connection and a dropped signal. But beamforming in indoor environments is complex because of the multipath. The router isn't creating a simple focused beam like a flashlight. Instead, it's creating a complex pattern of electromagnetic waves that, after bouncing off walls and passing through obstacles, will converge strongly at the client's location. The beam might actually be strongest in a direction away from the client, relying on reflections to deliver the signal. This is why moving your device even slightly can sometimes dramatically change signal strength. You're moving in and out of the focused regions created by beamforming. MIMO Multi-User MIMO extends these concepts to serve multiple users simultaneously. A MU-MIMO router can transmit to several devices at once, using beamforming to create nulls in the radiation pattern so that signals intended for one device don't interfere with others. It's like a sophisticated 3-dimensional puzzle where the router must calculate the right amplitude and phase for each antenna to simultaneously maximize signal at multiple locations while minimizing interference between them. The newest Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E standards introduce several technologies that improve performance in challenging propagation environments. ORF-DMR, orthogonal frequency. Division multiple access divides the wireless channel into smaller sub-channels called resource units. Instead of having one device use the entire channel to send a small amount of data, OFDMA allows multiple devices to transmit simultaneously on different sub-channels. This is particularly useful in environments with many walls and obstacles, where different devices might have very different signal qualities. The router can allocate more sub-channels to devices with good signals and fewer to those with poor signals, optimizing overall network efficiency. Target wake time, TWT, is another Wi-Fi 6 innovation that, while primarily designed for power saving, can help in environments with poor wall penetration. TWT allows devices to negotiate when they'll wake up to send or receive data. This reduces the number of devices competing for airtime at any given moment, which is particularly beneficial when signals are weak due to wall attenuation. With fewer devices transmitting simultaneously, there's less interference and better signal-to-noise ratios. The move to 1024 QAM, quadrature amplitude modulation, in Wi-Fi 6 and 4096 QAM in Wi-Fi 7 increases the amount of data that can be encoded in each symbol. However, these higher-order modulation schemes require better signal-to-noise ratios to work reliably. In practice, this means they're most useful when wall attenuation is low and signals are strong. When signals are weak due to wall penetration, the system automatically falls back to more robust modulation schemes like BPSK or QPSK, which can work with weaker signals but carry less data. BSS coloring is an interesting Wi-Fi 6 feature that helps in dense environments like apartment buildings, where signals from neighboring networks pass through walls and create interference. Each network is assigned a color, really just a number, and devices can ignore transmissions from different colored networks even if they're on the same channel. This reduces the impact of co-channel interference from neighbors' Wi-Fi passing through walls. The introduction of the 6 GHz band in Wi-Fi 6E provides a huge amount of new spectrum 1,200 MHz in the United States, compared to about 70 MHz at 2.4 GHz and 500 MHz at 5 GHz. This allows for wider channels, up to 160 MHz or even 320 MHz in Wi-Fi 7, which can carry enormous amounts of data. However, 6 GHz signals face even more challenges with wall penetration than 5 GHz. They attenuate more quickly and don't diffract around obstacles as readily. This makes 6 GHz best suited for high bandwidth applications in the same room as the router, while 2.4 and 5 GHz handle coverage in more distant rooms. Mesh networking has become a popular solution for dealing with wall penetration challenges in larger homes. Instead of trying to cover an entire house from a single router location, mesh systems use multiple nodes that communicate with each other. Each node can be placed strategically to minimize the number of walls signals must pass through to reach any given location. The nodes communicate with each other using dedicated backhaul channels, often using 5 GHz for the backhaul to minimize interference with client connections on 2.4 GHz. But mesh systems must deal with their own propagation challenges. The backhaul connections between nodes must pass through walls too. Some mesh systems use tri-band designs with a dedicated 5 GHz band for backhaul, while others use the new 6 GHz band. Some even use both 2.4 and 5 GHz simultaneously for backhaul, aggregating the bandwidth. The placement of mesh nodes becomes critical too far apart, and the backhaul signal is weak, too close, and you're not extending coverage efficiently. Let's now follow the journey of a single packet of data as it travels from your router through walls to your device. This packet might contain a tiny fragment of the audio you're listening to right now, perhaps just a few milliseconds of sound encoded into digital form. The packet begins its life in the router's memory, assembled from data that arrived over your internet connection. It's wrapped in multiple layers of protocol headers. Wi-Fi headers that specify where it's going and how it should be handled, IP headers that identify the source and destination on the internet, TCP headers that ensure reliable delivery, and finally the actual audio data, compressed and encoded. When it's time to transmit, the router's Wi-Fi chip takes this packet, perhaps 1,500 bytes of data, and prepares it for wireless transmission. First, it adds forward error correction codes, extra bits that will help the receiver detect and correct any errors that occur during transmission. This might double the amount of data that needs to be sent, but it's worth it for the improved reliability, especially when signals must pass through walls. Next, the data is mapped to constellation points in the QAM modulation scheme. If the router is using 256 QAM, each symbol represents 8 bits of data. The packet is broken up into groups of 8 bits, and each group is mapped to a specific combination of amplitude and phase. These constellation points are then assigned to subcarriers in the OFDM scheme. With 52 data subcarriers available in a 20 MHz channel, the router can send 52 symbols simultaneously, each carrying 8 bits, for a total of 416 bits per OFDM symbol. The digital signal processor in the router performs an inverse fast Fourier transform, converting the frequency domain OFDM subcarriers into a time domain signal. This signal is then converted from digital to analog, shifted up to the carrier frequency, let's say 2.437 GHz for channel 6 in the 2.4 GHz band, amplified and fed to the antennas. As the electromagnetic waves leave the antenna, they spread out in a pattern determined by the antenna design. A typical dipole antenna creates a donut-shaped pattern, with maximum radiation perpendicular to the antenna and nulls along its axis. If the rotor is using beamforming, each antenna transmits a slightly different version of the signal, with carefully calculated phase shifts that will cause the waves to add constructively at your device's location. The waves propagate outward at nearly the speed of light, about 299,792,458 meters per second in vacuum, but slightly slower in air due to its refractive index of about 1.0003. At this speed, the signal travels 1 meter in just 3.3 nanoseconds. To cross a typical room, say 5 meters, takes only 17 nanoseconds. Now the signal encounters its first wall. As the electromagnetic wave approaches the drywall surface, its oscillating electric field begins to interact with the electrons in the paper facing. These electrons, bound to their atoms but able to shift slightly, begin to oscillate in response to the field. They can't quite keep up with the 2.4 billion oscillations per second, so they lag slightly behind, absorbing a tiny amount of energy in the process. The wave enters the gypsum core, where it encounters calcium, sulfur, and oxygen atoms arranged in their crystal lattice, along with water molecules locked into the structure. The relative permittivity here is about 2.5 comma, which means the wave slows down to about 60% of the speed of light. The wavelength also shortens proportionally. from 12.5 centimeters in air to about 7.9 centimeters in the gypsum. Some of the wave energy reflects off the back surface of the drywall as it encounters the air cavity inside the wall. This reflected wave travels back through the gypsum and emerges from the front surface, where it interferes with the waves still arriving from the router. Meanwhile, the transmitted portion continues through the air cavity, moving at full speed again. If the signal encounters a wooden stud, it faces a different challenge. Wood's permittivity varies with the grain direction, but it's typically around 2, 3 when dry. The cellulose fibers, long chains of sugar molecules, interact weakly with the electromagnetic field. Some energy is absorbed, particularly if the wood contains moisture, but most of the signal continues through. Electrical wiring in the wall presents a more serious obstacle. The copper conductors are excellent reflectors of electromagnetic waves. When the signal hits a wire running perpendicular to its electric field polarization, it induces currents in the wire, which re-radiate electromagnetic waves. These re-radiated waves interfere with the original signal, creating complex patterns of constructive and destructive interference. After passing through the second layer of drywall on the far side of the wall, the signal emerges weakened but intact. It has lost perhaps 10 dB of power in total, meaning only 10 to 25% of the original power remains. But that's still more than enough for your device to receive it successfully. Modern Wi-Fi can work with signal strengths down to about -90 dBm and 0.000000001 milliwatts, though performance is much better with stronger signals. The journey isn't over yet. The signal continues to spread out, bouncing off furniture, walls, and ceiling. Some paths lead directly to your device, while others take scenic routes, reflecting multiple times before arriving. Your device's antenna picks up all these different versions of the signal, each arriving at slightly different times with different phases and amplitudes. Inside your device, the received signal is amplified by a low-noise amplifier, shifted down from the carrier frequency to baseband, and converted from analog to digital. The digital signal processor performs a fast Fourier transform to separate out the OFDM subcarriers. Each subcarrier is demodulated to extract the constellation points, which are then mapped back to bits. But wait, there are errors. Some bits have been corrupted by noise and interference during their journey through the walls. This is where the forward error correction codes prove their worth. Using sophisticated mathematical algorithms, the receiver can identify and correct most errors without needing to request retransmission. The Reed-Solomon codes and convolutional codes used in Wi-Fi can correct multiple bit errors in each packet. Finally, the packet is checked for integrity using its frame check sequence, a kind of digital fingerprint that verifies the data hasn't been corrupted beyond the ability of error correction to fix. If the packet passes this check, it's acknowledged with a brief ASIC frame sent back to the router. If not, the router will retransmit it, perhaps using a more robust modulation scheme or waiting for better channel conditions. The entire journey from router to device has taken microseconds. The electromagnetic propagation itself took only nanoseconds, with the rest of the time spent on processing. And this happens millions of times per second, creating the illusion of a continuous stream of data flowing through solid walls as if they weren't there at all. The story of Wi-Fi signals traveling through walls isn't the same everywhere in the world. Different countries have different building traditions, different materials, different regulations, and even different frequencies allocated for Wi-Fi use. These variations create a fascinating patchwork of wireless experiences across the globe. In Japan, for instance, many homes are built with traditional wooden construction methods that create relatively Wi-Fi friendly environments. The walls might be thin wood panels or even paper shoji screens in some cases, offering minimal resistance to radio waves. But modern Japanese apartments often feature reinforced concrete construction for earthquake resistance, creating challenging environments for Wi-Fi propagation. The density of housing in cities like Tokyo means that interference from neighboring networks is a major concern, with dozens of networks visible from any given apartment. Japanese regulations also allow for some unique Wi-Fi features. The country permits the use of weather radar detection channels in the 5 GHz band, known as W53 and W56 bands, which many other countries restrict. This provides additional spectrum for Wi-Fi, helping to alleviate congestion. However, devices using these channels must implement dynamic frequency selection, DFS, automatically switching channels if radar is detected. European buildings present their own unique challenges. Many structures in Europe are centuries old, built with thick stone or brick walls that can be nearly impenetrable to Wi-Fi signals. A medieval stone wall might be 2 feet thick or more, potentially attenuating signals by 30, 40 dB or more. These buildings were never designed with wireless signals in mind, and retrofitting them for good Wi-Fi coverage can be challenging. The solution often involves multiple access points connected by Ethernet cables run along baseboards or through conduits. Power line networking adapters, which send data over electrical wiring, are popular in Europe as an alternative to running new cables through ancient walls. Some buildings use outdoor access points to beam signals through windows, avoiding the walls entirely. European regulations differ from those in other regions too. The European Telecommunications Standards Institute, ETSI, sets lower power limits for Wi-Fi than the FCC in the United States. 100 milliwatts EIRP, effective isotropic radiated power, for 2.4 GHz versus 1 watt in the US. This means European Wi-Fi might have more trouble penetrating walls simply due to starting with less power, though the difference is only about 10 dB. In the Middle East, construction often uses concrete blocks or poured concrete for both exterior and interior walls, creating significant challenges for Wi-Fi propagation. The hot, dry climate means that concrete dries out more thoroughly than in humid climates, which actually improves Wi-Fi penetration somewhat. But many buildings also use metal reinforcement extensively for structural strength, which can severely attenuate signals. Some Middle Eastern countries have unique spectrum allocations too. In Israel, for instance, the 5.8 GHz band is restricted due to military use, limiting Wi-Fi to the lower 5 GHz channels. This reduces the available spectrum and can increase congestion, particularly in dense urban areas like Tel Aviv. North American construction varies widely, from wood frame houses with drywall interior walls, very Wi-Fi friendly, to concrete high-rises that challenge even the most powerful routers. The typical North American suburban home, with its wood frame construction and drywall interior walls, is nearly ideal for Wi-Fi propagation. Signals can often cover an entire house from a single, centrally located router. But there are regional variations. In the hurricane-prone southeast, concrete block construction is more common, particularly for exterior walls. In the southwest, adobe and stucco construction can create different propagation characteristics. Adobe walls made from sun-dried clay bricks have moderate Wi-Fi attenuation, similar to brick but potentially varying with moisture content. Canadian buildings face unique challenges from weather-related construction requirements. Homes in cold climates often have thick insulation, vapor barriers, and sometimes even reflective radiant barriers that can significantly affect Wi-Fi propagation. The metal-backed insulation used in some energy-efficient homes can create partial Faraday cages, severely limiting Wi-Fi coverage. In Australia and New Zealand, construction methods vary from the traditional Queenslander-style homes with thin wooden walls and large open spaces, excellent for Wi-Fi, to modern apartments with concrete construction similar to what's found in other countries. The relative isolation of these countries has led to some unique approaches to spectrum management, with Australia being one of the first countries to open up the 6 GHz band for Wi-Fi 6E use. South American construction often features brick and concrete, with interior walls commonly made of hollow clay bricks. These hollow bricks, with air pockets inside them, attenuate Wi-Fi signals less than solid bricks, perhaps 5 dB per wall instead of 8 dB. But the widespread use of metal security bars on windows, common in many South American cities, can significantly affect Wi-Fi signals trying to enter or leave buildings. African countries present enormous diversity in construction methods, from modern concrete and steel structures in cities to traditional materials in rural areas. Mud brick construction, common in parts of West Africa, has interesting Wi-Fi properties. When dry, mud bricks are relatively transparent to radio waves, but during the rainy season, as they absorb moisture, their attenuation can increase significantly. The rapid adoption of wireless technology in Africa, where many areas skipped wired infrastructure entirely, has led to innovative approaches to Wi-Fi deployment. Mesh networks connecting entire villages, solar-powered access points, and long-range Wi-Fi links spanning kilometers are common. These deployments often deal with outdoor propagation challenges like vegetation and rain fade, rather than wall penetration. In India, construction methods vary enormously from region to region and between economic strata. Modern IT campuses might have glass and steel construction with carefully designed Wi-Fi infrastructure, while residential buildings often feature thick brick or concrete walls with metal reinforcement. The density of urban areas like Mumbai or Delhi means that interference from neighboring networks is a major challenge. Indian regulations also have some unique aspects. The country has been relatively slow to open up new spectrum for Wi-Fi, with 6 GHz spectrum allocation still under consideration. This means that the 2.4 and 5 GHz bands are particularly congested in urban areas, making good Wi-Fi coverage even more challenging. Chinese construction has undergone rapid modernization, with millions of new apartments built using reinforced concrete. These buildings often have excellent wired infrastructure. Fiber optic connections are common even in residential buildings. But the concrete construction can make Wi-Fi coverage challenging. The solution is often to use multiple access points connected by Ethernet, with some apartments having an access point in every room. China has also been aggressive in adopting new Wi-Fi standards, with Wi-Fi 6 devices widely available and Wi-Fi 7 development proceeding rapidly. Chinese regulations allow for some unique features, like the use of higher power levels in some bands, which can help with penetrating the concrete walls common in Chinese construction. Climate plays a subtle but important role in how Wi-Fi signals propagate through walls around the world. In humid tropical climates, building materials tend to retain more moisture, increasing their attenuation of Wi-Fi signals. A concrete wall in Singapore might attenuate signals 3 dB more than an identical wall in Phoenix, simply due to the difference in moisture content. Seasonal variations can also affect Wi-Fi propagation. In temperate climates, walls might be more transparent to Wi-Fi in winter when humidity is low and materials are drier. Spring and summer, with higher humidity and potentially rain-soaked exterior walls, might see reduced Wi-Fi range. These effects are usually small, perhaps 1-2 dB variation, but can be noticeable in marginal coverage areas. Building codes and standards also influence how Wi-Fi signals propagate. Energy efficiency requirements in many developed countries have led to better insulated buildings with vapor barriers, multiple pane windows, and sometimes metallic radiant barriers. While these improve energy efficiency, they can create challenges for Wi-Fi propagation. A modern, energy-efficient home might require more access points than an older, less efficient one to achieve the same coverage. Fire codes can also affect Wi-Fi propagation. Fire-rated walls, required between units in multifamily buildings and in certain commercial applications, often contain multiple layers of drywall or special fire-resistant materials. These thicker, denser walls attenuate Wi-Fi signals more than standard walls. A typical fire-rated wall might attenuate signals by 10, 15 dB compared to 6 dB for a standard interior wall. Cultural factors influence building design in ways that affect Wi-Fi propagation. Open-plan living spaces, popular in Western countries, are generally good for Wi-Fi coverage, allowing signals to propagate freely. More compartmentalized designs with many separate rooms require signals to pass through more walls, creating coverage challenges. The height of buildings also matters for Wi-Fi propagation. In high-rise buildings, signals from other floors can create interference, especially in buildings with concrete floor slabs that only partially attenuate vertical signals. This three-dimensional interference environment is more complex than the primarily two-dimensional environment in single-story buildings. Urban density creates unique challenges for Wi-Fi propagation. In dense cities, signals from neighboring apartments don't just interfere, they can actually help or hinder your own Wi-Fi depending on the situation. A neighbor's router might create interference on the same channel, but it might also provide an alternative path for your own signals to bounce off, potentially improving coverage in some areas while degrading it in others. As we look toward the future, new technologies are emerging that will change how Wi-Fi signals interact with walls and obstacles. Wi-Fi 7, officially known as IEEE 802.11b, is already in development, promising even higher speeds and better performance in challenging environments. One of the key features of Wi-Fi 7 is multi-link operation, MLO, which allows devices to simultaneously connect on multiple bands, 2.4, 5, and 6 GHz. This means that even if one band is severely attenuated by walls, the device can maintain connectivity on other bands. It's like having multiple paths through a building and being able to use all of them at once. Wi-Fi 7 also introduces 320 MHz channels, twice as wide as the widest channels in Wi-Fi 6E. While these ultra-wide channels can carry enormous amounts of data. Theoretical speeds approaching 46 gigabits per second under ideal laboratory conditions. They're more susceptible to interference and may not penetrate walls as effectively. The technology includes sophisticated algorithms to dynamically adjust channel width based on conditions, using narrower channels when signals must pass through walls. Looking further ahead, researchers are exploring even higher frequencies for future Wi-Fi standards. The 60 GHz band, used by the WiGig standard, offers huge amounts of spectrum, but very poor wall penetration. Signals are almost completely blocked by walls. This might seem like a disadvantage, but it could actually be useful for creating secure, room-specific networks that don't leak into adjacent spaces. At the other extreme, there's growing interest in using lower frequencies for IoT devices that need long range and good wall penetration, but not high data rates. The 900 MHz band, with wavelengths around 33 centimeters, can penetrate walls much more effectively than current Wi-Fi frequencies, though at much lower data rates. Passive Wi-Fi is an emerging technology that could revolutionize how low-power devices communicate through walls. Instead of generating their own radio signals, passive Wi-Fi devices reflect and modulate existing Wi-Fi signals, similar to how RFID tags work. This requires so little power that devices could run for years on small batteries or even harvest energy from ambient radio waves. The reflected signals are weak, but because they use existing Wi-Fi transmissions, they can leverage the router's power to penetrate walls. Intelligent reflecting surfaces, IRS, represent another fascinating approach to dealing with wall penetration challenges. These are panels covered with many small reflecting elements that can be controlled electronically to change how they reflect radio waves. Placed strategically on walls or ceilings, they could redirect Wi-Fi signals around obstacles or focus them into dead zones. Imagine wallpaper that actively improves Wi-Fi coverage by steering signals where they're needed. Machine learning is increasingly being applied to Wi-Fi optimization. Future routers might learn the propagation characteristics of your specific home, which walls attenuate signals, where reflections occur, how people movement affects coverage, and automatically adjust their transmission parameters to optimize coverage. They could even predict when you're about to move to a different room and pre-adjust their beamforming patterns to maintain seamless connectivity. Quantum radar principles might eventually be applied to Wi-Fi, using entangled photons to detect signals in extremely noisy environments. While still highly experimental and in the realm of theoretical physics research, this could potentially allow Wi-Fi to work in conditions where current technology fails, such as through thick reinforced concrete or in the presence of strong interference. Material science advances could also change how walls interact with Wi-Fi. Researchers are developing frequency-selective surfaces, materials that are transparent to some frequencies while blocking others. Imagine walls that block 2.4 GHz signals from escaping, keeping your network secure and reducing interference with neighbors, while allowing 5 GHz signals through for backhaul connections between mesh nodes. Metamaterials, artificially structured materials with properties not found in nature, could revolutionize how we deal with Wi-Fi propagation. Researchers have demonstrated metamaterial lenses that can focus Wi-Fi signals, cloaking devices that can hide objects from Wi-Fi detection, and even materials with negative refractive indices that bend signals in unusual ways. Future buildings might incorporate metamaterial structures that actively enhance Wi-Fi propagation rather than hindering it. Li-Fi, using visible light for communication, represents a different approach to indoor wireless networking. While light can't penetrate walls at all, this becomes an advantage for security and interference management. Each room could have its own Li-Fi network with no interference between rooms. Hybrid systems might use Li-Fi for high-speed connections within rooms and Wi-Fi for coverage through walls. The integration of 5G and Wi-Fi networks is another trend that will affect how we think about wireless signals and walls. Future devices might seamlessly switch between Wi-Fi and 5G depending on which provides better performance. Small 5G cells installed indoors could provide coverage in areas where Wi-Fi struggles to penetrate, while Wi-Fi handles high-speed local connectivity. Distributed antenna systems, DDAS, already used in large buildings for cellular coverage, might become common for Wi-Fi too. Instead of trying to cover an entire building from a few access points, DAS uses many small antennas connected by cables to a central system. This reduces the distance signals need to travel through air and walls, improving coverage and capacity. The trend toward smart buildings will also affect Wi-Fi propagation. Buildings with sensors everywhere, automated systems, and intelligent infrastructure might actively manage their Wi-Fi environment. Windows with electronically controlled transparency could also control their transparency to radio waves. Walls might have built-in repeaters or reflectors that can be activated as needed. As we near the end of our journey through the invisible world of Wi-Fi signals, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for the quiet miracle happening all around you. Right now, as you listen to these words, billions of electromagnetic waves are passing through the walls of your room, carrying not just this audio, but messages, images, videos, and connections to people all around the world. These waves, descendants of the same fundamental force that brings us light and warmth from the sun, have been tamed and harnessed by human ingenuity to create an invisible infrastructure that connects us all. They slip through walls not by brute force, but by a kind of electromagnetic diplomacy, negotiating with atoms and molecules, finding paths through what seems solid and impermeable. The next time your Wi-Fi signal seems weak in some corner of your home, you'll understand why. It's not just distance that matters, but the materials those faithful waves must traverse: the drywall and wood, the concrete and metal, the glass and insulation. Each material presents its own challenges, its own character in this electromagnetic story. And the technology continues to evolve, finding new ways to work with and around the laws of physics. From the simple single antenna routers of 20 years ago to today's sophisticated MIMO systems with beamforming and MIMO, from the crowded 2.4 GHz band to the wide-open spaces of 6 GHz, engineers keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But at its heart, the story remains the same. electromagnetic waves, oscillating billions of times per second, carrying information through space and matter, connecting us across distances and through obstacles. It's a story of physics and engineering, of innovation and problem-solving, but also of something more fundamental: the human desire to communicate, to stay connected, to share information and experiences regardless of the walls between us. As you drift off to sleep tonight, those waves will continue their journey. Your router will keep transmitting, sending out its beacon frames every 100 milliseconds, announcing its presence to any device that might be listening. The walls of your home will continue their subtle interaction with these signals, absorbing a little energy, reflecting some back, but always allowing most to pass through. And somewhere in that electromagnetic symphony, there might be a packet of data that started its journey on the other side of the world, bounced off satellites, flowed through fiber optic cables on the ocean floor, raced through networks of increasing complexity, until finally it arrived at your router, was transformed into radio waves, passed through your walls as we've described, and reached your device, delivering perhaps a message from a friend, an update from family, or simply the next few seconds of audio to help you drift peacefully off to sleep. The dance of electrons continues, the fields oscillate, the waves propagate, and the invisible infrastructure of our connected world hums along, quietly, efficiently, miraculously. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the hidden workings of Wi-Fi. May your signals always find their way through the walls, and may your connections remain strong. If you're still awake and enjoyed learning about the invisible waves that surround us, consider subscribing for more peaceful journeys through the technology that shapes our daily lives. Until next time, sweet dreams, and may your sleep be as peaceful as the gentle oscillation of electromagnetic waves in the night.